Hello friends and welcome to Out of Pocket. My name is Ryan, aka Ron, and today is another Heuristics Help. Heuristics? Help! You wouldn't believe how cold it just got in my southern area of the woods. It says it feels like 20 outside and it felt like 75 the other day, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get into it. I figured since the two of you so much enjoyed the first math video, I'd do a part 2, and in fact I'm planning to do a part 3 next month. Just thinking long term, you know? Alright, so today we're planning to do stage 1 math. The first video was on basic math. Today we're looking at stage 1. Alright, check this out. Very brief refresher. If you're confused by this, please look at the first math video. It'll make so much more sense. Basically what we're looking at here is HP plus attack minus retreat minus attack cost plus beneficial effects minus adverse effects. Again, I'm not going through this in detail, but if you want to know more, check out the first math video. It should make sense as we go along. As a reminder, beneficial effects or abilities are things such as the opponent can't retreat, or modifiers such as take 20 less damage from attacks, basically anything on the card that is helping that Pokemon. Adverse effects are things that are harmful, such as taking 10 damage like Solgaleo, or discarding all energy like Infernape. Anything that's harming the active Pokemon or the Pokemon as it were. Alright, check it out. This is actually really important. So if you happen to catch my new updated basic EX tier list in my posts on YouTube, I've changed my math a little bit. In other words, I've changed the math to match, I think, a little bit closer to what the developers are actually looking at. So if you recall from my first math video, I was saying this is only regarding cost of attack. So I was saying for the first energy for a Pokemon, minus 10 on the math. For the second energy on the attack, minus 20 on the math, which would be 30 total, because minus 10 for the first, minus 20 for the second, and then so on and so forth. So for the third energy, minus 30, for the fourth energy, minus 40, for the fifth, minus 50. I don't think there's 6 energy cost yet. Heaven help us if they make one of those. But regardless, that's what I was doing. Now, after thinking about it more, and I think this applies pretty evenly across the board, even for items and supporters and stuff like that, I think, as you can see on this page, for each energy cost per attack, I think it's minus 30 mathematically. In other words, if a Pokemon has a 1 cost attack, it's minus 30 for that energy. If a Pokemon has a 2 cost attack, it's minus 60. 3 costs minus 90, etc., etc. It's 30 per energy. Now, these other things on here aren't as important, but they do pertain to energy. So for each additional energy type, for example, if you have an attack that is a lightning energy and a water energy such as Dragonite, I'm taking off an additional 30 for that cost. Now this one is key, discarding energy. At first I was valuing it the same, so I was saying, oh, if they have a 3 cost attack, let's say, in fact, let's think of Infernape. Infernape has a 2 cost attack that does 140 damage. So I was saying before, okay, it costs 10 for the first energy, 20 for the second energy, that's 30, and then because it discards all of its energy, that's another 30. But after looking at the math, namely the basic Charmander, if you're familiar with the basic Charmander, in fact, I'll throw it on the screen. Alright, so this thing is 30 attack, which you'll notice on most Charmanders, such as this one right here, most attacks are 20. So this is a very common formula for basic Pokemon that have evolutions. You have 60 HP, 20 attack, 1 retreat cost, 1 cost for the energy attack. Now, let's compare it to the other Charmander. So this one is 30 attack, it's only 10 more than the other one. However, you have to discard a fire energy from this Pokemon. So because of this, primarily, although I think it applies fairly evenly across the board, I'm saying it's only minus 10 for energy discard instead of a whole nother minus 30 as I was doing before, if that makes sense. Basically, the math of this Charmander evens out with the other Charmander if I say minus 10 for the discard. In other words, it's probably easier in general to get discarded energy back onto a Pokemon, or you're just finishing the game in the case of like Lugia or something. But back to the heuristics. I will make the brief caveat that this could not apply the same way to stage 1 and stage 2 Pokemon. It's possible that the math looks different for stage 1 and stage 2, you know, for discard or for other things, but I haven't really got that in depth yet, so we'll see. This is kind of an evolving process. Alright, so moving on, discarding an additional energy type, I do minus 10 per type. So basically like adding an additional energy type, if you're discarding multiple energy types, like Lugia is the only one that comes to mind, I'm adding an additional 10 cost cost per type. So in Lugia's case, it would be 20 additional costs because it's 3 different kinds of energy. Next, we have generating energy. I have at plus 30 each. So things that this would apply to would be like Flareon can create its own energy, so that would be plus 30. Giratina can create its own energy, so plus 30. Things like that. And lastly, if a Pokemon says discard all energy, such as Hydreigon, then I'm adding an additional minus 10 for that cost because you can't stack. So I think that should hurt a little bit more mathematically. All right, with all that said, let's get into basic stage 1 math. All right, so the basic math of stage 1 basics is pretty much what I was describing in the first video, but let's look over it very briefly again. So it's usually either this formula, 50 health, or sometimes, in fact, usually 60 health, but sometimes 50 health. And if you'll recall from the first video, I said that if a Pokemon has 50 health or 10 attack instead of 60 HP and 20 attack, then I'm guessing that their evolution is a little bit stronger than a Pokemon that has 60 HP. Now on the old math, this would have been 50 plus 20, 50 HP plus 20 attack is 70, minus 10 for the retreat is 60, minus 10 for the cost for Peck is 50. That would have been the old math. But because I'm doing 30 cost per energy cost for the attack, the new math is 50 HP plus 20 attack is 70, minus 10 retreat is 60, minus 30 for the Peck cost is 30. So I'm suggesting that the cost for basic Pokemon that evolve into stage 1 Pokemon is generally either 30 or 40, and typically 40. Here's an example. All right, here's a really easy example from the new set. So we have Frillish, it's 60 HP plus 20 attack, that's 80, minus 10 retreat is 70, and then again minus 30 for this energy cost, so that's 40. This is a very typical example for a stage 1 basic, and it's very typical for a stage 2 basic, but that's not today. All right, so we've looked at basics for stage 1. Now let's look at some general stage 1s, and then we'll plan to look at the EX Pokemon one by one like last time, but I'll try to go through it a little faster. So Mismagius, we have 90 HP plus 70 attack, that's 160. Minus 10 retreat is 150. Now it's minus 30 per each energy, so that's 60 total, so we're at 90. So I said in the old video that I thought the baseline for stage 1s was 120 on the old math, but this math for stage 1s for 2 cost attacks in particular is 30 less. And so I'm suggesting that the new baseline for a stage 1 evolution for a non-EX Pokemon is 90. Let's look at another example. Not all of them work out to be 90, but a lot of them do. I think that's the general baseline. So let's look at Forretress. This one's a little more complicated because it has one more cost, but not much. So you have 130 HP plus 80 attack, that's 210. Minus 3 retreat, it's 10 for each retreat. Now we're down to 180, and then it's minus 90 for its cost of attack because it's 30 each energy and there's 3 energy, that's 90. So you take 180 minus 90, that's 90. Let's do one more example. All right, this one's nice and clean too. We have 110 HP plus 60 attack, that's 170, minus 20 retreat cost is 150, and then minus 60 for the attack cost, so we're back down to 90. Now this is not going to hold up again in every circumstance. Some are more above rate than others, like some will be 100, some might be 110. It depends on the Pokemon, but I think on average most base math Pokemon stage 1s on this math are 90. Now if you add that with what I'm saying is the general cost of a basic that evolves into a stage 1, I think that math, as we just looked at, is usually 40. If you add that to 90, that's 130. So I'm saying the total for a basic plus their stage 1 evolution is generally going to be 130. Now briefly again, why are we even talking about this? What's the purpose of this? I would give 2 reasons that I gave in the first video. Number 1, at least for me, it's very interesting. It helps tell me kind of what the baselines are for these cards. So it gives me an immediate way to evaluate new cards in a vacuum and see mathematically if they're above rate or not. A second reason would be it's just interesting. It helps me to think through the game better. It gives me a better ability to engage with the game, and so that's for me part of the reason I like doing it. But I would say the main reason is probably because it gives you a baseline for the math for a normal card, and so when new cards come out, I can quickly evaluate mathematically what a new card's power level is and then start to think about it competitively from there. All right, now let's move into the EX Pokemon. All right, we're going to start at the very bottom. So if you recall, I just said I think the average for a stage 1 non non-EX is 90, so I have Wigglytuff here at the bottom at 120. So it's not that much better than a normal stage 1 Pokemon. A little bit, yes, but not much. In fact, I'll spoil it to say I've averaged out all my math for the stage 1 evolution EX Pokemon, and the average is 160. So Wigglytuff is starting not very good. It's bringing up the rear. I'll keep the formula at the bottom below Wigglytuff below all of the Pokemon pictures. You see it there at the bottom, HP plus attack minus retreat, so you can kind of follow along with what I'm doing if you're lost. All right, so, and then at the top, so at the top we have the exact things that I'm doing in the formula. So we see here Wigglytuff is a colorless Pokemon, so we have 140 HP plus 80 attack minus 20 retreat minus 90 cost. And then if you'll recall from the first math video, I do minus 10 for colorless because colorless has no strength into any other Pokemon, and because I'm not valuing colorless Pokemon in the grand scope of the game, but rather how they function in my specific decks, then I'm saying, well, they have no strength and that is a weakness, so I'm doing minus 10 for that. So all that adds up to 100. If you want to check me, you can. And then I believe that Pokemon as a game values sleep and confusion and other such things at 20, and so that puts Wigglytuff at the bottom at a grand total of 120. All right, Lickilicky, moving on. Well, Lickilicky, that's hard to say. Lickilicky, moving on. We're going quicker this time. That's my goal. All right, so colorless again, it's up to 130, so it's 10 better I have than Wigglytuff. So Wigglytuff is the lowest in my mind of the stage 1 EX Pokemon, which is a shame because the normal non-EX is actually really good. In fact, it might even be better in some sense. It probably is. All right, so Lickilicky, let's look at 160 HP plus 100 attack, minus 40 retreat, minus 120 costs for the attack, minus 10 colorless is 90. Now I'm saying if the ability averages plus 40, then I value it at a total of 130. So let's read its ability. It says, well, it's not really an ability, but it's an effect of the attack. It says, flip a coin until you get tails. This attack does 40 more damage for each heads. Now I might even be being generous here. In fact, I am being generous here. I'm gonna drop this to 30. All right, yeah, I was being overly generous there. So I think the average ability or the average for this effect is plus 30 because it says this attack does 40 more for each heads, which normally for coin flipping I value at half, so I would value it at 20, but because it has the potential to do 80 or 120 or it can keep going, then I'm going to add a little bit more for that effect, so plus 10. So I'm going to say on average this will do 30 extra damage because sometimes it'll do 0, but sometimes it'll do 40, and occasionally it'll do 80, and very rarely 120 or higher. So I'm going to average its attack at 130, and now it's in the lowest tier with Wigglytuff. All right, moving on. All right, next we have Wugtrio. People like Wugtrio, but it's just not that good. It is fun, but it's not that good. So 140 HP plus 100 attack. I'll plan to explain that in a second. Minus 10 retreat, minus 90 cost is 140. The reason I have it at 100 attack, even though it does 150 total, is because it's random. And so if you recall from the last video, which you probably don't, I said basically I subtract for random attacks, I subtract whatever the amount of one of those is from the total. In other words, the total here is 150 because it does 53 times. And then so I'm subtracting one of those 50 from the total. So 150 minus 50 for the random cost, if you will, equals 100. That's how I'm getting to that number. All right, check it out. It's the newest promo that everyone was like, oh, it might beat Suicune. Well, probably not. In a vacuum, it's not very good. So let's do the math. We have 140 HP plus 130 attack, minus 10 retreat cost, minus 90 cost for its Volt Tackle, and then it does 30 damage to itself. So I'm just taking that at face value, minus 30, that all adds up to 140. All right, moving on. Arcanine, we're still at the 140s. So we have 150 HP plus 120 attack, minus 20 retreat cost, minus 90 cost equals 160, but then it does 20 damage to itself. So I'm saying that's another minus 20, and so that's 140 total. I should mention again briefly, I said this in the original video, that I'm not valuing in this math colorless energy any different from the type energy. So for example, Arcanine here has 2 fire and 1 colorless. In my math, I am only running 1 energy dex, and I'm not evaluating the game in this math from a total meta perspective. So you could say it's stronger because it only has 1 colorless, and I do think DNA values the colorless energy and the normal energy, the type energy, different in how they do math. But for my purposes, because I'm running 1 energy dex, it all means the same to me. So I should just re-point that out from the first video point. All right, next up and last in the 140s, we have Alolan Dugtrio. So 130 HP plus 90 attack average, because if you flip 3 heads, all heads, that's 180, but it can also do 0 if you flip all tails, so the average is 90. So 90 minus 10 retreat minus 60 cost is 140. All right, moving on, we got Alolan Muk. I just had it at 140, but I think I undervalued its effect just a little bit, so now it's at 145. So we have 160 HP plus 80 attack minus 30 retreat cost minus 90 cost is 120. Now I was just valuing its ability at 20, but I think 25 is more accurate because I literally mathed it out, and because I have a sleep at 20, burned at 30, confused at 20, paralyzed at 40, and poisoned at 20, you don't have to follow that, and I divide that by 5, which is how many effects there are to choose from. The average is literally 26, but I rounded to 25, so that's how you get to 145. It's actually not terrible. It's not good, but it's not terrible. All right, moving on, we got Yanmega EX. Now we're in the 150s. We're not quite to the average, but we're getting closer. So we have 140 HP plus 120 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 90 cost for air slash, minus 10 energy because it discards a random energy from this Pokemon. Now again, if you recall from the beginning, beforehand I was saying that discarding energy should be the same cost as adding energy, but I don't think so. And again, I did the Charmander example, and I think that holds up with other Pokemon such as Yanmega as well. Because at the end of the day, like if you have Yanmega in the active and you discard 1 energy, that could not matter at all, because you might just say, okay, well next turn I'll put on another energy and I'll just keep attacking and it doesn't matter. So I think it's a lot less cost than I had it for discarding energy, again very much off of the Charmander example, and so that's where I'm getting the minus 10 energy from, and so that's a total of 150. Now again, you could value this differently because it has 3 colorless energy, so that means you could put it in any deck and that could be worth more. In fact, it is in some circumstances, but again, because I do 1 energy dex, I'm just valuing this on face value, so that's minus 90 cost for its attack and then minus that 10 additional for the discard. All right, Probopass still in the 150s, not complicated. We got 160 HP plus 90 attack minus 30 retreat cost minus 90 attack cost, and that's 130. And then because it's, well, so again, it's not an ability, but it's an effect from attacking. It says during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes minus 20 damage from attacks. I'm saying that's worth 20 because it's 20 in a nutshell, in a vacuum, and so that's 150 total. Now for a build, this is important, I'll plan to get to this one relevant, but for abilities that say take minus 20, so for example, Furfru from this latest set, or Shuckle, have abilities that say minus 20, just take minus 20. I add an additional 10 points for those because they are static. They are always active. And so for this Probopass, it has to attack. And so I'm saying that's worth 20. But if it had an ability that said you take minus 20 damage from attacks, then I would add that an additional 10 to that because it's always active no matter if I attack or not. And I would add 30, if that makes sense. All right, check it out. We have a bit of a book up top because it's a little bit more complicated. This is a Pokemon from the latest set, Melmetal. It's not bad, but it's not that good. So here we go. All right, first attack. Again, if you'll recall from the first video, I'll just re-explain real quick. I am doing the math I came up with for Pokemon that have 2 attacks is I value the first attack, and then I take the value of the second attack, including the HP in both of them, and then after that, I average them, and then after all that, then I subtract the retreat cost, because you're only 1 Pokemon, you only have 1 retreat cost, but it does have 2 attacks. So with all that said, let's do the math. So the first attack, Headbutt, is 170 HP for Melmetal, plus 80 attack, minus 90 cost for the Headbutt. That's 160. For the second attack, Metal Arms, we have 170 HP still, plus I'm averaging at 130 attack because it's 100 attack base, but if you have a tool attached, it does 50 more damage. So I'm taking a little bit above the average of that at 130. Average is 125, obviously, but I'm taking above average because I'm assuming you're generally going to have a tool. You could even value it higher if you wanted at like 140 on average, or 150 if you're like, I'm always going to have a tool. I'm doing 130. I think that's fair. And then minus 120 cost for its attack cost is 180. Now I just said up there, I'm leaning towards the positive side of charitability for the second attack. I just explained that. Now you have 160 for the Headbutt attack, 180 for the Metal Arms attack. You average those together, you get 170, and now I take the retreat cost out, which brings you, so 30 retreat cost, that brings you down to 140. But I said this also in the first video, because it has 2 attacks and that provides some additional flexibility, I think that's deserving of adding some extra math points, if you will, back in. So I'm adding plus 10 because it has 2 different attacks to choose from. It gives it flexibility, and I am doing that across the board. So for Pokemon like Tapu Koko or Mew or Mewtwo, I add an additional plus 10 because they have additional flexibility. So all that to say, that leads me to 150 for Melmetal. If that doesn't make sense, feel free to comment or rewind or read my little blurb up there on my heuristics document. But moving on. All right, moving on to Marowak. Not complicated. We have 140 HP plus 80 attack average because you're flipping 2 coins, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost gives you 150. I hate flipping coins. I don't like Marowak, but sometimes it's really good. It's probably pretty good with Will. So there you go. All right, moving on to a Pokemon that I really wanted to play, but I didn't because it costs 3, and it's that simple. It's just too expensive. But anyway, Lanturn, we have 150 HP plus 80 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 90 cost for the attack is 120. Now, I believe they value Paralyze mathematically at 40, and I believe they value Confusion mathematically at 20. And since it gets those 50% of the time, I'm valuing that average. I'm just taking the median, the average. I don't remember what median is. It's been too long. Anyway, I'm taking the average, which is 30. 40 plus 20 divided by 2 is 30, and adding that to the 120, that gets me to 150. Obviously, if you're paralyzing every time, it's way stronger, but you know, again, run Will. All right, Blissey, maybe the best promo they've ever put out. Maybe not, maybe. It's actually not bad. All right, so we have 180 HP plus 100 attack, minus 30 retreat, minus 120 cost, minus 10 colorless. I already explained that. That's 120. Now, I'm valuing the ability at 30 because half of the time you're going to heal 60, which means the average of that is 30. There's other ways you could do this if you wanted. That's how I'm doing it. So I'm saying average healing is 30, so therefore plus 30, that gets us to a total of 150. All right, moving on to another new Pokemon from the latest set, Mega Rising. We have Whimsicott EX. So I'm up to 155 now, so we're still below average, but we're getting closer. So Whimsicott, 140 HP plus 85 attack average. I'll plan to explain that in a second. Minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost is 155. The way I got 85 attack is I'm valuing its average attack at, well, let me just read it. It says this attack does 30 more damage for each energy in your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost. In other words, if your opponent has a retreat cost of 1, it does 70. Retreat cost of 2, it does 100. Retreat cost of 3, 130, etc., etc. So as people have pointed out, it is a direct Guzzlord counter. It one-shots Guzzlord. It's fantastic because Guzzlord has a 4 retreat cost, so that's plus 120 damage, is 160 total, and then it hits for weakness, so it's killing it in one shot. Now, I'm saying on average, I think the opponent it's attacking is going to have a 1.5 average retreat cost. Now, obviously, Pokemon either have 1, 2, 3, 4. They have round numbers, but I think on average, you're going to land somewhere between a 1 retreat cost and a 2 retreat cost. And so I'm saying 1.5, which is how I got the average damage of 85. You could value it higher potentially. Obviously, it depends on the meta. Sometimes it's going to be worse, sometimes better. Maybe in this meta, it would be more like, but against Blaziken, it hits for 70, but against Suicune, it hits for 100. 100. So it's like, how, well, the average is 85. So that's how I got to that. All right, moving on to the 160. So we've now arrived at what I would say is the average math of a stage 1 EX Pokemon. So first we have Weavile. So we have 140 HP plus 60 attack on average, minus 10 retreat, minus 30 cost is 160. Now I'm averaging it at 60 because it says if your opponent's active Pokemon has damage on it, this attack does 40 more damage. So it does 30 at the lowest, 70 at the highest. The average of that would be 50. I think on average your opponent's Pokemon is going to have damage on it more than it's not going to have damage on it. So I'm going to give it a plus 10 buffer, which moves it up to 60. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know, but I would say in general, your opponent's Pokemon is going to have damage on it more times than not, then it's not going to have damage. So 160. All right, moving on. This one's super easy. Number 20, Starmie, 130 HP plus 90 attack, minus 0 retreat, minus 60 cost is 160. That's it. It's not bad. All right, Paldean Clodsire, 160 HP plus 60 attack, minus 30 retreat, minus 60 cost is 130. Now its effect says if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 60 more damage. I think it's probably fair to say half of the time you're going to get them poisoned, because you might have a you're probably running 2 poison barbs. The Wooper, the first evolution of this, does poison them, but you know, a lot of times you might just evolve and they won't be poisoned. So I could add an extra buff here and say, yeah, more than half the time they'll be poisoned. That could be fair, kind of like I just did with Weavile, but I think it's a lot more likely your opponent's going to have damage than they're going to be poisoned. So I could be wrong, but I'm saying it's going to average at 90, which is just the average between 60 and 120, and so that puts it at 160, but you could possibly value this higher. All right, Mismagius, 140 HP plus 70 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost is 140. I'm pretty confident that they value Confusion in general at 20, so that's plus 20. Now that leads us to 160. Pretty good, but pretty average. All right, moving on. Number 17, Lycanroc. We have 150 HP plus 130 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 90 cost for its attack, and then again it discards 1 energy from the Pokemon, so I'm saying minus 10, so that's 160. All right, Donphan. Now Donphan functionally has 2 attacks. I've gone over this in previous video as well, but functionally has 2 attacks, so that's how I'm going to treat it. So first attack is 160 plus 50 attack minus 30 cost for the energy is 180. We're not doing a retreat yet until the end. The second attack, its effect says if this Pokemon has at least 2 energy attached, 2 extra fighting energy attached, this attack does 60 more damage. So basically I'm considering, even though it doesn't look like it, I'm saying it has a 1 cost fighting energy attack for 50 and a 3 cost fighting energy attack for 110, because that's basically what it says. So the second attack is 160 HP plus 110 attack minus 90 cost for the energy is 180. Now both of those are 180, so average it's still 180, and then you subtract 30 for the retreat, you're at 150, and add plus 10 because it has 2 attacks, and that gives it flexibility. I already spoke about this, so that's 160. All right, Glaceon EX. This one could get a little bit of flack, but it's just math, so bear with me. We have 140 HP plus 90 attack minus 10 retreat minus 90 cost is 130. Now I'm evaluating its ability at 30. And I've already kind of explained it, but let me go into it. Snowy Terrain says during Pokemon checkup, which happens at the end of your turn and your opponent's turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, do 10 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you come in and you hit with Freezing Wind for 90, your turn goes to end your turn, you do 10 additional damage to your opponent's Pokemon. So you could consider Freezing Wind effectively to be 100. Now, they attack you. You're still in the active spot. They take 10 damage more at the end of their turn. So it's almost like being poisoned. It's basically like poison. It's saying, I do 90 plus 10 more, that's 100, and then at the end of your turn you take 10 more. It's effectively like being poisoned, just a different way of wording it, and I'm valuing it additionally at plus 10 more to get to 30 total because of what I am terming, I'm creating, I don't know if someone's come up with this phrase, but I'm calling it passive constancy, because Snowy Terrain is always constant, but it's passive. In other words, you don't have to actively attack attack. So if you take, Skarmory's attack, for example, we talked about that in the basic Pokemon video, or Probopass earlier in this video, you have to attack to get the minus 20 damage. This doesn't say freezing wind. If you attack, you do 10 damage in the Pokemon checkup phase. No, it's just happening always. It's passive. You're not doing anything active, but it's constant, hence passive constancy. So I add 10 plus 10 mathematically for pretty much every ability that is passively constant, such as this. So that's 160. Now, people have said Glaceon's not great, and they're right, it's not great, but it's probably the worst EV evolution, but it's honestly not bad. I have it as average on the math, but obviously the other EV evolutions are better than this one. All right, Exeggutor EX, 160 HP plus 60 average attack, minus 30 retreat, minus 30 cost is 160. The reason they add attack average is 60 is because it says flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 40 more damage, so it can go up to 80. The average between 40 and 80 is 60, so that's how I get to 60. All right, Alolan Raichu EX, 140 HP plus 60 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 90 cost is 100. Its effect says this attack does 30 more damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. I have generally taken this on average to mean 2 energy attached to each opponent's active Pokemon on average. I think on average you will be attacking an active Pokemon that has 2 energy on the Pokemon. Sometimes it's going to have more, sometimes it's going to have less. I think average 2 is a pretty good average. That means plus 60 attack for this effect, which means average of 160. All right, Umbreon, one of my favorite Pokemon. Now we're into the 170s. So 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 60 cost is 140. I'm saying the ability on average is 30, and here's how I get that. Basically, I think mathematically they value items at 20, think potion, and supporters at 40. So Professor, I think they value drawing cards at 20 each. Professor draws 2 cards, that's 40. So Cyrus is a supporter, I think they value it at 40. And given that this is Cyrus on a stick, I think you start at 40, but then because Umbreon has to be active and it can't do it from the bench, I think you have to take away 10 there, because if it was just on the bench like Pidgeot is Sabrina on a stick. But if Umbreon could just Cyrus from the bench, I think that would be crazy. You would value it at least at 40, maybe higher. But because it has to be active, I'm taking away 10 points for that and putting it at 170. I think you could argue it's higher because this Pokemon's very good, in my opinion. But for now, that's where I'm putting it. I understand I just made the passive constancy argument with Glaceon earlier, and this does have passive constancy, but it's also specific because the Pokemon, they may not have a bench Pokemon with damage on it, so it might be worth nothing, and it will be sometimes. And also because there's literally a supporter called Cyrus that I value at 40, then I think 40 is just a good baseline to start at, and then take away 10 because you can't use it at all times. All right, moving on to Sylveon. Now you might see Sylveon at number 11 and think Sylveon at 11, well, don't worry, it's higher than that on my tier list. There's just a fair amount of Pokemon I have at 170. So Sylveon, we have 140 HP plus 70 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost is 140. Now, its ability says, and it has changed the game, it says Happy Ribbon. Once during your turn, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, so your Eevee, you may draw 2 cards. I don't know when you would ever not draw 2 cards, but nonetheless, you don't have to. Now, let's read my little paragraph up here. So the ability I'm valuing at 60 because I just said with Professor, I think it's plus 20 for each card draw, so that's 40, and then I'm saying plus 10 for it being able to happen on the bench or active, because you can evolve an Eevee on your bench or active and still draw those 2 cards. I think that's at least worth plus 10. And then I'm saying plus 10 for the beginning of the turn, because you have the Eevee that draws a card. I think the attack's called Collect, but it happens at the end of the turn. That's pretty normal. Because Sylveon happens any time during your turn and you can actually use those cards, I'm saying that's at least worth plus 10. I could could be undervaluing these two things, being able to do it from bench or active and being able to do it at the beginning of your turn. I could be undervaluing, but that's how I have it mathed. Now, because of that, I'm saying it's worth 200 the turn it evolves, because it's 140 just flat, but because of its ability, I'm saying it's 200 on that turn, which is extremely above rate. In fact, I think that's either the highest I have stage 1 or almost the highest I have for stage 1. But after it draws 2, it's only worth 140, which is pretty below rate. In fact, it's 20 below the average. And so it's not really good once it uses its effect, but its effect is obviously used for other things, other more powerful Pokemon such as Espeon or Charizard to get online faster. So it's very good, and I have it again higher on my tier list, but I think because it's pretty weak after it uses its effect, I'm taking the average of the turn it evolves and the average of what it is the rest of the time, and that is 170, because it's 200 the turn it uses its ability when it evolves, and then 140 the rest of the time. The average is 170. Again, this could be off. That's just how I'm doing it. Feel free to comment below if you have thoughts on any of this. All right, moving on to Rapidash EX, we have 150 HP plus 130 attack because it does 20 also to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, which I value the same as if it were to the active. Minus 20 retreat, minus 90 cost is 170. Now again, I'm doing this in a vacuum, so I'm not saying, oh, Rapidash is just as valuable to the game of Pocket as Sylveon. Obviously it's not. Sylveon has changed the game in many ways, but in a vacuum, I am saying Rapidash is about the same strength level as Sylveon. And in fact, once they're just attacking each other, Rapidash is way stronger than Sylveon. But Sylveon has its +2 draw effect, which again, because of the synergy around it, is extremely strong. But in a vacuum, I'm saying they're about the same. So please hear that caveat. All right, moving on to Lucario. I think Lucario is actually super underrated. It's basically the same as Rapidash. In fact, it's almost exactly the same, but a little bit different. It has 10 less attack to the active and 10 more to the bench. So it's 150 HP plus 130 attack total, minus 20 retreat, minus 90 cost is 170. It's basically the same as Rapidash. I really think both of these Pokemon are good. I think you could build around them. Yes, they're to some extent weak. I think you probably have to run at least one Cyrus, if not two, in a deck that would have these Pokemon. But I do think they're pretty good and probably not as played as they should be. All right, Leafeon, we're still in the 170s. So we have 140 HP plus 70 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 90 cost, because it's 3 cost energy is 110. So I'm saying its ability is worth 60, similar to Sylveon, which it says Forest Breath. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may take a grass energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your grass Pokemon. Now I'm getting to 60 because I'm saying plus 30 for the energy generation. So I talked about earlier, I'm saying energy generation is worth 30. I'm saying plus 10 for the passive constancy because anytime you're in the active spot, you can just do it. I would add 10 more if you could do it on the bench, but you can't. So anyway, it's so plus 10 for the constancy because you can just evolve, especially with that new Eevee that you can evolve turn 1 and start putting energy on stuff, which is really powerful. And then I'm saying plus 20 for the energy it gives itself. So basically, you know, it's functionally a 2 cost attack because it gets online and then it gives itself an energy, and you know, it's basically 2 cost. And so I'm saying it's 20 for itself, not 30, because it's only probably going to use its ability one time on itself and not constantly. So I'm basically just saying, okay, so the first turn, you know, you put an energy, and then the next turn you put another energy, and then you use its ability on itself to generate that third energy. So functionally you're just attacking for 2 costs, and then for however many turns it survives after that, it's putting energy on the bench, which is where I'm getting the first plus 30 math. So I don't know if that made full sense, but that's how I'm getting it to 170. I think it's a powerful Pokemon. All right, Gyarados EX, we're still in the 170s. We have 180 HP plus 140 attack, minus 30 retreat, minus 120 cost is 170. I'm saying its ability balances out because it says discard a random energy from among the energy attached to all Pokemon. In other words, there's a 50% chance it discards one of your energies. There's a 50% chance it discards one of your opponent's energy. I'm saying that balances itself out, so it's 170. Now, what I'm not getting into in this math video is how Gyarados or all of these evolutions stack up with their pre-evolutions, but it should be noted that Gyarados, when you add in Magikarp, is going to be further down on the list compared to some of its other partner Pokemon at 170, because their pre-evolutions are, I think without exception, stronger than its pre-evolution, with one exception which is coming up, if that makes sense. All right, check it out. We got more complicated math. We're almost to the top of the 170s, not quite, but we have Flareon EX. If you thought Giratina was complicated, strap in. All right, we have 150 HP plus 130 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 90 cost, minus 20 energy because it's discarding 2 energy, so that's 10 for each. That's 150. Now this is where it gets fun. I'm evaluating its ability at 20. You could say that's way too low. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. You can debate all of these things. And here's how I got that. So I'm saying plus 30 for the energy generation, because again, 30 for energy, minus 20 damage it does to itself, so we're at 10. And then I'm saying plus 10 for the passive constancy, because you can do it whenever you want, which is plus 10 more, again, like I just said. So we're at 20, and then minus 10 because the energy has to come from the discard. So for the first energy, it's going to take a minute to get online because you either have to retreat or discard an energy from its ability or something. Your opponent has to discard one. Regardless, you can't actually use this ability until you have a discarded energy, so I'm taking away 10 points for that, and that leads us to a total of 10. Now, I'm saying you also do what all of that I just said, you have that on the bench also, because this is not only when you're active, you can also do that from the bench. So I'm saying from the bench, do exactly what I just said. Plus 30 for the generation, minus 20 damage, plus 10 for the constancy, minus 10 for having to be from the discard pile is an additional 10. You add that to the first 10 that I said, and you have 20 total. And then add that to the total earlier before the ability, which was 150, and you have 170. That was a massive mouthful. If that didn't make sense, again, feel free to try to think about it or wrestle with it or ask questions, but that's the best I can come up with. All right, Crabominable. I just had it at 160, but I think I was undervaluing it, so here we go. 160 HP plus 70 attack on average, minus 30 retreat, minus 30 cost is 170. Now it says, its effect says, during your next turn, this Pokemon's insatiable striking, which is what it's called, attack does plus 40 damage. So it starts at 40, but the turns following, as long as you don't retreat or get knocked back or something, it does 80. And I'm saying, like Weavile, if you recall Weavile, I'm saying that typically you're going to be doing this for 80 more than 40. So if you take the average, it's at 60, but I think in general you're going to be doing 80 more than 40. So I'm adding plus 10 to that, which is 70 attack on average. All right, we've made it to the end of the 170s. We got 4 left. So Aerodactyl, we have 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost is 180, which is pretty darn good. I'm saying the ability, sorry, it's 150. I forgot to change to my new math. So 140 plus 80 minus 10 minus 60 is 150. Now, I'm valuing the ability at 20, which is 170. It says your opponent can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their active Pokemon. So I think for the constancy of it, I would say 10. And then for the ability itself, I think I would say 10 more, because sometimes, in fact, a decent amount of times, it's just not going to be worth anything. It's not going to do anything because they're going to evolve their bench, or they're just going to work around it or whatever. It's just not going to be impactful. It's going to be too late or something. But sometimes it's going to be pretty darn effective. So I think 10 is fair, plus the constancy was 20, so I think 20 is fair. It's a good ability, but it's not that good, especially because it evolves from a fossil, and so it gets online really slowly typically. Now, if Aerodactyl evolved from a non-fossil, I think this ability would be stronger, because then you have a decent chance of getting it online turn 3 or 4, which would make it significantly stronger, I think. But in a vacuum, Aerodactyl is pretty darn good. All right, 3 left, and we are getting into what I would consider the the creme de la creme, the best of stage ones, again in a vacuum, because if you take it out of a vacuum and you put it in the overall context of the meta, you could obviously increase things like Sylveon, like Flareon, you know, even Umbreon to some, because of all the EV synergies. You can increase certain things that are below, but in a vacuum, I think these are the 3 strongest stage 1 EX Pokemon, and 2 of them are from Mega Rising. So first we have Jolteon. We're at 180 now, which is 20 above average. We have 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost. So basically it's Aerodactyl, except its ability is stronger. So it says electromagnetic wall. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, whenever your opponent attaches an energy from their energy zone to one of their Pokemon, do 20 damage to that Pokemon. So I'm saying the ability is 30 because you have your 20 damage, and then I'm saying 10 for its passive constancy, which I already talked about. So basically, as long as it's active, it's just doing 20 damage to any Pokemon that attaches energy, which is pretty nuts. So it doesn't even, because it doesn't even have to attack, because it's passively constant, I'm saying that's an additional plus 10, which is a total of 180. I think this is a very good Pokemon. All right, 2 left, and I'm saying this one has roughly the same math as Jolteon. Dragalge, I'm not sure how to say it, but Dragalge will say EX. I haven't even seen this Pokemon in the meta, but I think it's kind of slept on. It can take a full hit from Gyarados, Mega Gyarados, or Mega Blaziken, and it does a pretty solid amount of damage. It would pair really well with like Nihilego or whatever. I do have a deck that doesn't have Nihilego in it, but I do have a deck with this Pokemon, and I think it's pretty powerful. So 150 HP, that 150 is big, plus 80 attack, minus 20 retreat, minus 60 cost, and I'm also valuing its ability at 30 because if it's in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, the attacking Pokemon is now poisoned, which is going to do 10 to them on your turn and 10 to them on their turn. And again, I'm saying 10 for the passive constancy, because if you just evolve it, even if it can't attack yet and they attack you, it's going to poison them. So I think the 150 HP is very strong. The fact that it can just poison them on demand for them attacking is very strong. It's almost like a built-in Rocky Helmet, and Jolteon is kind of the same. So I think Dragalge is very good. So I'm valuing it tied with Jolteon at 180. All right, now moving on to number 1. If you're astute, you know what's coming. Espeon EX. Let's do the fancy art one. Let's do the cool art. All right, Espeon EX. I think I just had my hot take about Indeedee being the best basic. I think in a vacuum, Espeon EX is clearly the best stage 1 EX Pokemon. Now again, obviously there's synergies, right? So you can argue different Pokemon with different synergies, and I'm not talking about the megas here, but in a vacuum, I think Espeon EX is clearly the best stage 1 EX Pokemon mathematically. So we have 140 HP plus 80 attack, minus 10 retreat, minus 60 cost is 150, but then you have plus 30 healing, that's 180. So its ability says once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may heal 30 from one of your Pokemon. So I'm saying for the healing alone, we're at 180, which is already tied with Dragalge and Jolteon, but then I'm adding 10 more because it can heal anything. So it can heal your bench, which is just, I mean, it can heal itself or your bench, which is crazy, especially when you have the double Espeons going and you can just heal 60 a turn with the 1 retreat. It's pretty crazy. And then I'm saying plus 10 more for the passive constancy, because as soon as you evolve, again, if you're in the active spot, you can heal anything. I think that's extremely strong. Yes, healing is sometimes not relevant, you know, it could just not matter. You could just die or, you know, whatever, but sometimes it's extremely relevant. So in a vacuum, I think this Pokemon is very, very strong. I severely undervalued it when I first read it, and I think ultimately it carries the Sylveon Espeon deck. Of course, there's really good synergy with Sylveon drawing cards and the 4 EVs and everything, but Espeon, from a battle perspective, Sylveon draws the cards so you can go into Espeon and kill your opponent, because Espeon is very strong. So that's my math video. Let's go to the outro. All right, thank y'all for watching. That was a lot. I don't think it was as much as the first math video, but I haven't edited yet, so we'll see. But thank you for watching. I appreciate it. This is fun for me to do, and I don't know if this will catch on for a while, but maybe someday people will watch this and think, huh, that's interesting, and they'll, you know, whatever, maybe developers or something. Anyway, it's fun to make. It's fun to get off my chest all these heuristics that I write down. So appreciate it. I'll plan to put the Pokemon names in the timestamps so you can click around if you want to, so it's a little less overwhelming. But next week I will plan to make a tasty tier list on these Stage 1 EX Pokemon, so it basically is tracking with what I just said with some fluctuation because I have to rank the Pokemon in a certain order if they're similar math or the same math. But anyway, I'm planning to do that, and then next month the Stage 2s, and then we'll see from there. But thank you for watching if you did, or skimming, or whatever you did. You know, stay warm out there and have a good night, a good morning, and a good evening. See ya.